I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the case file landed on my desk. Fraud cases aren't new to me. I've seen people cheat their friends, families, even their own companies, but this one had a different kind of stink. The victims weren't rich investors or careless corporations. They were ordinary job seekers in New York, desperate for work, hungry for opportunity, and willing to believe that someone was finally offering them a break. Detective Marin came in with that look he gets when he knows I'll be furious. "Judge," he said, "we've got about a dozen complaints, all from people who applied for jobs online. Same company name, same recruiter. They paid upfront processing fees and never heard back." "Let me guess," I said. "The company doesn't exist." He nodded. "Not even a post office box." The office address leads to a nail salon in Queens. I dealt with scams before, but this one was clever. The fraudster used fake job listings for reputable firms, Goldman Sachs, Deloitte, even city government positions. They ran ads promising high pay, benefits, and immediate placement. The victims were told they had to secure their slot by paying a $300 background check fee. Some wired the money. Others used prepaid debit cards. All ended up with empty pockets and no job. By the time I got to court, the gallery was packed. 22 victims sat in the benches, nervous, embarrassed, and angry. Across the aisle sat the defendant, a man named Eric Rowe, 33, wearing a cheap suit and a smug grin that made me want to hand down the verdict before the trial even began. He ran a so-called employment agency called JobNet Associates. His website looked legitimate, professional logo, testimonials, LinkedIn links, and even fake reviews from happy hires. But every document tied back to one IP address, his. The first witness, a young woman named Sandra, told her story through tears. She'd lost her job during the pandemic and saw a listing for an administrative assistant role at a midtown law firm. After her online interview, the recruiter told her she'd been accepted, pending a $250 fee for security clearance. She borrowed the money from her mother, sent it, and never heard back. Rowe didn't even flinch. Next came a single father, a veteran who'd applied for a maintenance position at the city hospital. Same story, different lie. When I asked Rowe to explain himself, he leaned back, that smirk still glued to his face, and said, "These people knew there were fees. It's not my fault they didn't read the fine print. I've heard some nerve in my time, but that was a new level. I leaned forward. "Mr. Rowe, you preyed on people who were looking for honest work. You built a website full of fake promises, used company names you had no right to, and took money you never earned. You didn't just steal their money, you stole their hope." He shrugged. "That's business." The courtroom went dead quiet. Even the clerk stopped typing. I've been on the bench long enough to know when someone has no remorse. This man didn't even understand the meaning of guilt. He looked at those victims as if they were numbers in a ledger. The prosecutor presented the digital trail, emails, bank transfers, and text messages. One message made my blood boil. Rowe telling his assistant, "Keep the fee requests rolling. People are desperate this month." When I read that aloud, he shifted for the first time. Not guilt, not fear, just annoyance that his words were being used against him. After closing arguments, I called for a short recess. I sat alone in chambers, looking out over Lower Manhattan, thinking about how easy it's become for predators to hide behind screens and polished websites. Once upon a time, you had to face your victim to cheat them. Now, you can do it from your couch. When court resumed, I gave my decision. "Eric Rowe, you are guilty of fraud, wire fraud, and impersonation. You exploited trust for profit. You will repay every cent you stole, and you will serve time in state prison. Maybe behind bars, you'll find an honest job for the first time in your life." He glared at me, but I didn't care. I'd seen that look before, the look of someone angry that their game was finally over. As the bailiff led him out, the victim stood. Some cried, others simply exhaled. Justice doesn't give them their money back right away, but it gives them something almost as valuable, closure. After everyone left, I sat for a moment, thinking about the city outside. New York can make you feel invincible or invisible, depending on the day. But in my courtroom, I try to remind people that honesty still counts for something. Maybe that's old-fashioned. Maybe it's not enough. But for today, it was justice, and that's still worth something. When the courtroom emptied out and the last echo of the gavel faded, I stayed seated. The paperwork was still warm on the bench, but my mind wasn't on the ink or the signatures. It was on the faces of those people, each one who came in hoping for work and walked out feeling foolish. Fraud doesn't just take money. It takes dignity. It leaves a person questioning their own judgment. And that's what made this case so heavy on my chest. A few days later, Detective Murren came back with more updates. "Judge," he said, dropping another thick file on my desk, "we're not done. We found another layer." He explained how Rowe had used his fake job network to sell personal data to offshore identity rings. Every resume that came in a name, address, social security number, work history was sold for a few dollars each. These victims didn't just lose money, Murren said quietly. They're going to spend months untangling identity theft. That hit me hard. The scam wasn't a small-time hustle anymore. It was a pipeline of exploitation. I asked him how someone like Rowe thought he'd get away with it. Murren shook his head. Because he did, for almost 2 years. People don't report small losses. They blame themselves. He counted on that. Later that week, I visited one of the victims. Her name was Denise, a retired nurse trying to get back into the workforce. She'd answered a posting for a home health supervisor, one that promised flexible hours and $40 an hour. "Judge," she told me, "it wasn't even about the money. I just wanted to feel useful again." When I found out it was fake, I didn't even cry over the $200. I cried because I felt stupid. I told her what I tell all victims: don't mistake trust for stupidity. Trust is what makes society function. Without it, we're all just looking over our shoulders. She smiled, but I could see the hurt still there. It would take time. Meanwhile, Rowe's sentencing drew attention. The story ran on local news. Some outlets painted it as another cyber scam case. I didn't like that term. It sounded too sterile, too modern. What it really was, old-fashioned theft, only dressed in digital clothing. The day of sentencing, Rowe's lawyer stood up and argued for leniency. "My client grew up poor, Your Honor," he said. "He was trying to build a business, and he made mistakes. He's willing to make restitution. I've heard that song before. Everyone's willing once they're caught." I looked at Rowe, and for once, he didn't meet my eyes. I said, "You claim poverty drove you, but let me tell you something, being broke isn't a crime. Lying, deceiving, and preying on people who trusted you, that's the crime. Don't you dare confuse the two." I sentenced him to 6 years in state prison, full restitution, and a lifetime ban from any employment or recruitment business. The courtroom murmured, some relieved, some stunned. But I didn't hand down that sentence to make headlines. I did it to make a point. People who weaponize desperation need to learn that consequences still exist, even in a digital age, afterward. One of the younger victims, a recent college graduate named Matteo, approached me quietly in the hallway. "Judge," he said, "I thought I'd never trust anyone again. But today, I felt like somebody finally cared." Those words stayed with me all week. They reminded me why I still sit behind that bench after all these years. Justice isn't about the punishment. It's about restoring something that was stolen. Sometimes money, sometimes faith. A month later, Murren called again. "You'll want to hear this," he said. Turns out Rowe had a partner, a woman named Clara, his so-called administrative assistant. She was running the same scam from another state under a new company name. When agents tracked her down in New Jersey, she had a laptop full of fake job listings ready to post. The greed had no end. When Clara was brought in, she didn't have Rose's arrogance. She cried before I even asked a question. He told me it was legal, she said, shaking. He said everyone does it. I'd heard that excuse before too. She was older, maybe in her 40s, clearly someone who'd fallen into the wrong man's promises. I gave her a lighter sentence but made her testify against him. She did, and her testimony sealed his appeal's fate. Sometimes justice works slowly, like molasses. But it works. Months passed, and the victims started rebuilding their lives. Sandra got a real job at a small law office in Brooklyn. Matteo landed a position at a startup that heard his story on TV and wanted to help. Denise, the retired nurse, started volunteering at a senior center. Little victories, but victories all the same. One evening, I was walking out of the courthouse when I saw the city lights flickering off the Hudson. New York, the city of ambition, dreams, and second chances. But it's also a city that attracts predators who feed on those dreams. I can't stop them all, but as long as I wear this robe, I can make sure a few of them pay the price. I got in my car, the file still on the passenger seat. Another case closed, but another reminder that justice isn't a grand event. It's a daily act, a stubborn, deliberate refusal to let deceit win. And as long as I can hold a gavel, I'll keep fighting that fight, one scammer, one case, one truth at a time.